Was the hit mechanic in Phase 4 a mistake? And are we going to see the same mechanic in Phase 5? I wanna open the discussion to it, because I think there is only two sides here, one side that thinks it's awesome and the other side that is completely vitriolic. So I wanna give you a more balanced perspective of the good things that the hit mechanic brought up and the bad things that the hit mechanic brought up. Now, first of all, what is the hit mechanic on itself? The hit mechanic is a 3 difficulty level system where if you do not meet the fire resistance requirements for that hit level, you're gonna instantly die. It also makes the mechanics of the bosses a little harder, but not that much harder. It's almost the same fight, except of course Gar. I think Gar is the only boss where it becomes radically harder to fight, but for the most part, Hit 2 and Hit 1 are functionally the same raid. Of course, Hit 3 has an extra boss at the end and you can get even more loot on that, but basically, what is the incentive? Why would you try to do higher levels? Why would you try to do a difficult and more hard raid? The incentive they put for the hit mechanic is that you get more loot. Not better loot, but more loot. Especially the rare drops in particular, they became a lot more common. That's, for example, the sulfurous bindings. I think we're on the third bindings I've seen so far drop. Still no Thunder Fury for Medina though. I haven't seen it yet. I am very sad. But that's a pretty good incentive. There is a couple of very elusive items in Molten Core that pretty much everybody needs. The most common that you're gonna think about is the Onslaught Girdle. That belt should be best in slot at least well into tier 2. The Mage Blade, that's another one that everybody wants. And of course the Quick Strike Ring. Can't forget about those. Those are items that are gonna take a long time to get your raid stocked up on them. Now, to be fair, as far as the loot system goes, I do not have a lot of issue with it. I would have a lot of issue if they made it like in Heroics in Retail, where you get better gear the harder difficulty you make. I think that is a bad system because it creates a catch-22 where the top guilds are the ones that get the good gear first, so they have an easier time getting to farming the raid later because they get the first batches of good gear, and it kind of locks down the hit level 2 and hit level 1 players into their hit level because no matter how much you grind, you're never gonna get to the same gear level as the hit 3 people, and in turn progression is gonna be, if your gear is not very good, okay, I get it. If your guild is good, this is not gonna be a problem. But if you're like an average guild, if your guild is not amazing, putting better loot on hit level 3 is only gonna get people stuck. So credit where credit is due. I like that idea, I like that approach. Now for the mechanic itself, I got a lot of issues. To be quite honest, my main issue is I think difficulty levels period should not be a thing in Classic. From my point of view, there is only 2 difficulty levels in Vanilla, on progression and on farm, and that's it. And the reason that I do not like having difficulty levels in general is because it devalues the efforts of everybody else. Let's take a look at the statistics so you know what I mean. What happens in Hit 3 is a lot of people attempt to do Hit 3 and they hit a wall, they get stuck on one boss and they stop doing Hit 3 and they go back to Hit 2, they change the difficulty so they can finish the raid. But I think the metrics we wanna see is the easiest boss because that means how many people are attempting to do Hit 3. And that's a total of 3,359 people. They are doing Shashra because he is the easiest boss in Hit level 3. Pretty simple boss, the mechanic is always the same, just move away from the arcane explosion thing, that's pretty much it. But 3,359, that's our benchmark for Hit level 3, don't forget that number. If we go down to Hit level 2, which is the most popular right now, we're looking at 7,183 people doing Magma Dad. Once again, you see the same problem in Hit level 2 where a lot of people are skipping Hit level 2 in some bosses. Most people get stuck at Gar. Gar is the great filter of this raid. You can see a lot of people do Hit 3 Lucifron and they go down to Hit 2 Magma Dad and Gehennas, and they go down to Hit 1 Gar because Gar is terrifying. So that's why the numbers do not quite add up. But once again, you take the number 7,183, that's Hit level 2, and Hit level 1, which is not the most popular anymore, we're looking at a healthy 4,400 people that are doing Gar in Hit level 1. You see, Gar is the most popular Hit level 1 boss. It's because a lot of people in Hit level 2 decide to skip Gar. Gar is a little complicated to do. You either do it as intended and kill the mobs, which nobody wants to do, me included. I hate doing that. We did it last week and I just hated it. And otherwise you just DPS race it, but if your guild is not amazing, you can't DPS race it quite. So that kinda sucks. But yes, 4,479. There is about 11,600 guilds that are doing Hit level 1 and Hit level 2 consistently every 2 weeks. Once again, this is the data for 2 lockouts. If you want to compare that to the 3,359 that do Hit level 3, about only a third of the population are even attempting, not doing, not clearing, attempting hit level 3. Guys, it's been a month. I think it's pretty fair to say that most people are, if they didn't do hit 3 at this point, they are probably not gonna try now. They don't want to do the grind, and I do not blame them. Now, I know the meme, welfare epics, give the noobs what they want, yada yada yada, but I think it leaves a sour taste on everybody's mouth that 70% of the population are gonna look at the raid and they are gonna do like, yeah, I killed Ragnaros, I did the raid, but I do not feel like I did it because there's these other people that are doing like the super uber duper thingy, and I will never get to do it because of this one problem that I got with hit level 3. As you guys know, you need 226 fire resistance to not get one shot in hit level 3, and I think the main reason that people are not doing hit level 3 is not that they don't want to do it. The thing is that classic guilds do not operate in the same way that retail guilds do. In a retail guild, where the raids are a lot harder, the raids tend to consolidate in the same skill level. There is people of the same roughly skill level, they tend to sort into each guild. This is a top 300 guild, this is a top 10,000 guild, so on and so forth and so forth. Classic guilds do not work that way, okay? Classic guilds are basically just a logistical tool. They are just a social construct. What I mean by that is that noobs and sweater tryhards tend to coexist in the same guild, okay? Which is something that doesn't happen in retail, but in classic raids, the idea is that you got like 10 people that pump like a madman, and then you got like 10 people that are just okay at the game, and that's how you get the bosses killed. That's always been the way in Classic. That's been the way long before Classic came out in private servers. You are free not to like that this is the case, but for most guilds this is the case. And the way the hit 3 mechanic is implemented, I think is incompatible with the way that guilds function in vanilla. You see, there is no way to pick up the slack from other people in this system, and that's also a problem I got with a lot of mechanics in Sunken Temple, for example, where all it takes is one guy to mess up and everybody dies. That is not a Classic mechanic, okay? If you do something stupid and you die, that's fine, but if you do something stupid and everybody has to suffer from it, that destroys the social fabric of Classic. That makes it so people don't want to carry people that they like but are not great at the game, and at that point we're gonna get the same structure that we got in retail, where the serious people are only hang out with serious people, the kinda casuals only hang out with kinda casuals, and it all starts to break down. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I think hit level 3 is too hard or too easy. My problem is that there is a floor for how good everybody has to be to do hit 3. No matter how good the raid is, if one guy doesn't have 226 fire resistance, you can't go, because that guy is gonna be useless the entire raid. So what is happening in Season of Discovery is that there is maybe 10 people in the split that really want to do hit 3, they are ready, they are pumped up, they want to go, and 10 people didn't quite do the grind yet, so they are stuck in hit 2 forever. Tell me in the comments if this is your case. I know a lot of people that raid and they tell me the same story. Let me know, like, if you're like the guy that doesn't want to grind the fire resistance and the rest of your guild wants, or if you're the guy that really wants to do hit 3 but 10 people in your split don't want to do it, because both of you are losing here. This might be a little clunky to implement, and that probably means that they should have never messed with difficulty levels at all, but I would have liked some different system where the average fire resistance of the raid as a whole is what matters, and not the resistance of like one guy, or maybe that, let's say, 18 people got full fire resistance and 2 people don't, and those people do not die. Something like that. I would have liked something like that, or maybe a system where you can donate, quote unquote, some of your resistance to somebody else for the raid, or something in that light. So the average performance of the raid as a whole is what matters, rather than the average individual performance of every single person, which is what the fire resistance system and the one-shot threshold is doing. But as it is with this system, a good chunk on the player base, maybe not 70%, maybe at the end of the tier we're gonna see something like maybe 60% of the player base is only doing hit level 2 and everybody else is on hit level 3. That's still a huge part of the player base that you're gatekeeping out of the raid, and before I say that, no, that doesn't mean that you should nerf the hit mechanic to the ground. Made a whole video on why that's not a great idea either, but until we get to see some compromise where taking like 2 people that are not very good, that do not have all the resistance, will work, a lot of raids are gonna be like held back by the last 3 people in the raid. That's the worst, the most toxic way you can make a guild die. Now, my other problem with it is that they actually made pogging a lot harder, and I do not mean it in the sense that people wanna pog this thing, quite the contrary, just finding people to fill got a lot harder. Since you're splitting the player base in 3 levels, if you're missing a healer for your raid, you got 90 people ready to go, and you gotta get like 1 healer of trade chat to go because, I don't know, your healer is sick on the raid. Before phase 4, all you had to do was go in trade chat and say, I need a healer for Sunken Temple, let's go, and that's it. But now, you gotta get somebody somebody that has enough fire resistance to do, let's say, hit level 2 for example, but not enough to do hit level 3 because he's not gonna wanna do hit level 2 with you because he can do the better one. And as such, you're effectively cutting the player base in 3. At a time where the population is at the lowest we had any phase, we have 3 times less people from the potential pool of raiders to pick for a raid because everybody is like set to do one type of hit level. Once again, the main problem that I see with this mechanic, you could have an awesome group of 19 people that are amazing and you could like just need to fill one spot and be more than happy to get like a random noob and carry him through the raid just to fill that spot, but this mechanic prevents you from doing that, and in turn I think this is gonna hurt the recruiting. Recruiting has been a lot harder this phase, because aside from very hardcore raids, that's how most people find a guild. They go to a POG, the POG goes well and they go like, oh, can I join you? And that's it, that's how people join guilds. And making that little process 3 times harder is not doing anybody any favors for the future of guilds. Now the next problem I have with this phase, and this is a tuning problem and this actually has an easy fix. The gear doesn't make any sense. Tier 1 has a fire resistance value of 61. Of course, most people do not go for full tier 1 because they gotta get some off pieces that are very good, the onslaught gear doll for example. But even then, if you get the intended gear, the gear that you're supposed to use in molten core to deal with this mechanic, you only get 61 fire resistance. Let me say that again, you can get the best gear available and you're still not even 30% of the way into meeting the requirement, let alone the cap. The cap is not even in the question right now. So this means that you will never ever be able to wear full best in slot to molten core. Not even best in slot once again, because this is assuming you wear full tier 1, which is almost never best in slot. And I think that's just from a perspective of the progression, how you feel that you're going through the game. I think it just sucks. You're always gonna have to sacrifice at least 2 pieces of gear to work. And as a side note, I think this is a bit of a crutch for like the difficulty level, just forcing everybody to be a little weaker instead of making the bosses harder or giving them more HP, not necessarily harder, just giving the bosses more HP. That was a huge mistake. Hit 3 parses are always going to be lower DPS than hit 1 and hit 2 parses. Even if the best of the best of the best of the guilds are only doing hit level 3, their DPS logs are gonna suck compared to hit level 2 and hit level 1 people. Once again, from the perspective of progression, I do not like that one bit. The last con I want to bring up about the fire resistance system that we got right now is that it also makes alt raids, getting a new character, a lot harder. And I don't mean that you gotta grind for it, okay? That's fine. If you gotta do your own due diligence to get your character ready to the raid, that's perfect. My problem is now you gotta do a hit level 1 split for the alts and a hit level 2 or hit level 3 split for the serious raid. And once again, mix and matching people to make both splits work is not something you can do anymore. The way most guilds work is that the serious split usually has the best composition, and the non-serious, the casual split has like the messed up composition, you know, the feels of everybody else that do not quite fit on any other raid that you put them in there. And of course, whenever the serious big ball split is missing like one particular class, like let's say they are missing a feral druid that week and they really need one, they can draw one from the casual split, put them in the serious split, and that way at least they are going to have a serious composition to go at it. But now you cannot do that because the people doing hit level 1 do not have the resistance to do hit level 3. So once again, you are gimping the serious raids that do hit level 3 at the same time as you are removing like a chance for promotion, for lack of a better word, a chance for like the alts or the new players in the guild to progress into like the big boys of the guild. And of course, over time you see cliques starting to form where like one split is always hanging out with the same people because they are the same guys raiding every time, and the other clique, the big boys, the in-group, whatever you want to call it, they are hanging out with themselves only. And that's how you put a wedge in the middle of the guild. Now, before I rule everything out about this hit mechanic, I want to say there is one very, very significant advantage of hit, and like this is in a way a success for what they intended this to do. What was the goal of hit level 3? Extending progression. That's it. In Classic, as soon as you step on the raid and you kill the bosses, you are done with the raid and you are pretty much on farm. You just raid log and you don't have to worry about it. I pull up this graph every other goddamn video at this point, but as you can see, when the raid comes out, there's a spike and then boom, it drops off. Because people are done with the raid, a couple people get best in slot or they don't care anymore or whatever, and they are done for the rest of the expansion. But if you take a look at phase 4 at the very end there, even though it's smaller because they killed the freaking game with phase 3, it's still slowly growing, okay? People are still invested in their characters. People are still trying to get the raids done every week because there is at least something to strive for at some point, okay? gameplay, and I do not want to disregard that feeling. I think that's great. I don't know how long they want to keep it up. Like, I don't think this slow growth is gonna stay forever with us. But compared to Phase 3, which died the second week it came out, it started dropping off again, this definitely breathed a lot of life into Phase 4. Another advantage from the hit mechanic that I really like is the fact that you gotta grind before the raid. You gotta do something to get prepared for it. I think that's great. The raid log factor is a cancer in vanilla. I just hate raid logging into a game. That's the reason I do not really raid in Cataclysm anymore. Like, what's even the point? I do not play the character at all after that. But since at the start of the phase I was the tank that was supposed to tank Ragnaros, I actually had to go out there and get my fire resistance cap. And that meant I played the game a whole lot when the phase came out. I was farming every goddamn dungeon in the map because I had to. And you can see, like, Blackrock Mountain at launch, it was full of people. Everything you went, it was full of people. Everybody had to do it. Everybody had to prepare. Everybody was hanging out and doing dungeons and farming materials and doing everything they had to do to get their gear. That is not something we saw at the launch of any other phase. People got their levels and then they stormed the raid and they got the raid done and they quit for the entire week. Also, to be fair, I think the staggering the raids like 1 week away from the phase coming out was a great idea. I sure do hope they do that again. I guess they cannot anymore because there is no more leveling, but yeah, the next time they start with this from the ground up, they gotta do that. But now, for a bit of a conclusion, should they put this mechanic in Phase 5? Well, I see one problem with it on top of many other problems, and that is that item levels are gonna rise. So in theory, it should be way easier to get fire resistance cap or whatever resistance cap than it was in Phase 4 because Tier 2 gear should have more stats than Tier 1, of course. They could get around it by making a new stat or something like that if they are willing to work that hard. I do not think they are, but at the end of the day, I think they could have implemented the hit mechanic a lot better, especially just buffing the hell out of Tier 1 gear. That would have fixed most of everybody's problems. Most people are never gonna do hit 3 because they will, if they do not actually intentionally go grind and buy the gear they need for it, they will never get to the cap. But if the Tier 1 had the resistance you needed, people that raided every week would eventually have enough rest to go to hit level 3 or very close to it, and then like One Piece or something like that, you know. So I think it's gonna be a very big challenge to make something that works like the hit mechanic in a nutshell, something that you gotta grind for, you gotta prepare for, you gotta stack a bunch of stats to get to that point, but that it doesn't cause the same fragmentation and stagnation problems it creates for all the guilds that raid. And while they might find a way, if you had a lot of time and a lot of checks and balances and a lot of like effort put into this to actually figure out how to make difficulty levels work, at the end of the day, I really gotta ask you, is it worth it? Is it worth having this discussion of how many workarounds we gotta put into the hit mechanic to make the hit mechanic work? Do we really have to compromise on a system that we know doesn't really work? I do you one better. Is it worth putting more time into making a mechanic like this work again instead of just putting more work in the phase in general, just making the raid better, putting more stuff on it? I think that should be the conclusion. I think that should be what you come out to this video thinking. Making a hit-like mechanic again is a lot of work, it may not work, and there is a good chance it will backfire and piss everybody off. So yes, I think the hit mechanic itself was a failure, a welcome failure. I like that they are willing to experiment, and to be fair, it could have been a lot more stupid. But at the end of the day, I do not think I want to see it again. Besides, I think you can reach the same effect of getting the player base to be more engaged with the raid and have more staying power in the phase without doing a difficulty mechanic at all. Make, let's say, 3 best in slot items, 1 for every class, or maybe the best in slot weapon for every class, something like that. Just a bunch of gear that every single spec is going to need, and you gate it behind like a set amount of reagents that you can only get from the bosses in BWL. That's it. Even if you split the raid, even if you're doing some weird cheese mechanic where you're doing BWL with only 10 people, and that's only the top of the top of the top, so I wouldn't worry about those guys, there is going to be a set amount of weeks you gotta do to get your gear for everybody. Hell, just make it so everybody gets one of those reagents every week and it's BOP, and that way you can guarantee that everybody has to do a set amount of weeks to be best in slot. You can even put a gold sync on it. I think we need more gold syncs in the game anyway. I don't know, you're smart, you can figure it out. I don't want to see the hit mechanic again. Subscribe, join the Discord, and thank you for watching.